for Friday, May the 28th at 6 o'clock. We are going back to Spain, but not Spain in a way that any of you have seen before. Reason being that these wines have just got here. These are Succés Vinicola, and they make a rosé, a white, and a red. And these are not desperately serious wines, as you might have been able to tell from the label with its watermelon and starfish and popsicle. These are designed to be light, fresh, summer, easy drinking wines, and they just got here. They are exactly what we were going to be pushing for summer. It's the perfect summer tasting. We're also going to throw in the Villa Real for kind of your big steak cookouts, a little more serious wine, but also from Spain. Tasting tickets for this are $85, and all that and more coming up Friday, May the 28th at 6 o'clock. Hello everyone, Kyle from Andrew Hilton here. We are going to be, as you saw in the promo, jumping into some really fun Spanish wines, but maybe not the Spain you've come to expect. I mean, yes, when we get to the last red, it's exactly the Spain you've come to expect. It's 6 years old and it comes from an oak barrel and it spent way too long in that oak barrel, and you know, that's the Spain we kind of know and are familiar with. But there's a whole other side to Spain, and it's kind of a new, exciting type, and I think that wine writers have finally gotten sick of bemoaning the fact that people have, you know, never really come around to this style of wine drinking, at least younger people. And instead, the market has shifted and Spain has started making lighter, fresher, more interesting wines, at least for the North American market. Now, these three wines by Succés Vinicola are represented by my friend, Eric Mercier of Juice Imports. Hello, Eric.
Hello. Thank you for having me again.
It's always an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on a blustery, windy Friday night. It's going to be a lot of fun. Now, we are all going to get the white wine, the Parellada, in our glasses. Why don't you introduce us to our first winery here, the Succés Vinicola, which I'm absolutely confident that I've been mispronouncing this entire time.
I believe it's Succés, but yeah, you're pretty close, other than the S at the end.
Yeah, other than the fact I completely mispronounced it, I was right on, yes.
So yeah, this is a really cool project. This is by Mariana and Albert. They're a really young couple that basically went to winemaking school together when they were like 19, 20 years old, fell in love, got married, started their own winery when they were 20, and then have been making wine together for the last, 8, 9 years, somewhere around there. I think they started their own project in 2011, somewhere around there. So yeah, about 10 years now.
God, that makes me feel so old. So very old.
It makes me feel old. I seldom feel old, and that's one of the few exceptions to that rule. But yeah, they're located basically just adjacent to Barcelona. So if you're ever in Barcelona, this is a really great place to go visit. It's a lot different than the rest of Spain. From a winemaking style, from a grape variety style. We'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. But essentially, this is like high elevation vineyards. Their lowest vineyards are around 400 meters above sea level, and they go all the way up to 750 meters above sea level. And you're talking only, a handful of kilometers from the coast. So this goes from the ocean to being high elevation, and it basically means that they can make these brighter, fresher styles of wine. This region is actually famous for sparkling wine. So most cava comes from in and around this area. So the first wine that we have is made from Parellada. So a grape variety that's traditionally used to make cava. Again, sparkling wine historically. And you can definitely see some of the flavor profile similarities between this and cava. It's kind of like cava, but still and with a little bit more texture. This is coming from vines that are around 40 years old. So even their young vine wines tend to be a little bit older. As I'm sure we've talked about on a million of these episodes before, older vines tend to lead to more concentrated fruit, more balance, without having to manipulate the wine. And so I think that they've done a really great job here. One of the things that makes this wine unique is that 50% of it is actually fermented with the grape skins. They're not just using the grape juice from Parellada grapes, but they're actually using the grape skins on 50% of it. And this extracts a little bit more flavor, a little bit more texture. Parellada tends to do best on the highest elevation sites. It tends to be a little bit aromatic. And so by using the skins, you're extracting sort of the full potential of what this wine can be. It still pretty much drinks like a white wine, not really like a full orange wine, which is normally what we'd call a skin fermented white wine. And so, yeah, I think it's sort of the perfect introduction to warm weather if ever we get that in Alberta here.
It's warm. My watch says it's like 16 degrees. It's just blowing 1,000 miles an hour out there. So yeah, it's certainly warm, but it's still not exactly a nice day. You covered a lot of things that I actually want to dip into a little bit more. So our kind of subregion here is Concha De Barbera, which is like a subregion of Tarragona, which is itself like a subregion of Catalonia, the Calatayud, which is, like you said, predominantly sparkling wine country. And Parellada, along with like Macabeo and Xarel·lo, these are your three main white grape varieties that are used to make, along with Chardonnay, the traditional Spanish sparkling wines. Do you want to talk a little bit about Parellada's role in that blend, what it does for it, whether it's thought to be like the highest quality grape in the Cava blend traditionally, one of the lower grapes, and where that fits with this wine as a whole? Like, what is it bringing to the Cava blend, and how is that accented in this wine?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a lot of debate going on in the Cava world right now about what the highest quality grape varieties are. Xarel·lo, for me, really brings sort of like a savory element to it, which, again, really translates to sparkling wine. If you think of something like champagne, for instance, you don't think of fruity. The first thing you think of when you think of, like, a Blanc de Noir in champagne is not like fruit characteristics. It's savoriness, it's salinity. And so for me, Xarel·lo tends to have, or Xarel·lo, depending on who you're talking to, tends to have more of those sort of like savory umami characteristics, versus Parellada, for me, tends to have more fruit. It's actually classified as an aromatic grape variety, which puts it in the same category as like Riesling and Gewürztraminer and Chenin Blanc, even though it's not particularly similar flavor profile wise. The problem with Parellada, though, is that it does not do particularly well on those low elevations. And most of the vineyards here are planted between 200 and 400 meters above sea level, versus all of the ones that Succés are using are above that 400, above the 400 meter mark. One of the things that makes this possible is the fact that Parellada tends to be very late budding. So basically in springtime, when you go from like what looks like a dead plant to having all the leaves, to having flowers, and then having grapes, that's a really sensitive time for the plant. So if you're planting at lower elevations, it's warmer, it's more consistent, versus at those higher elevations, you could get spring frost, which could totally just kill your crop. But Parellada, because it's like kind of sprouts later, it's basically immune to those spring frosts, which makes it so that you can plant it at these high elevations and then get higher quality, because you're getting more ripeness, more intensity from the sun, these greater diurnal shifts. So if you've ever, gone up to the mountains and then all of a sudden it goes to nighttime and it's freezing cold, even though everywhere else in Alberta is like still 25 degrees, that's what's happening at the top of these mountains where these vines are planted. So it gets very cold, and then that basically prevents things like disease from spreading in the vineyard. It retains acidity so that your wines end up bright and fresh even when you harvest them super ripe. And so, yeah, I don't know. For me, Parellada, underrated grape variety, especially for still wine. I've been lucky enough to taste quite a few of them now, and I think there's a huge push in this region to make more still wines rather than just making sparkling wines. They're showing that it has the diversity to make both. If you look at champagne, you make still wine out of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir that tastes pretty darn good. And so there's no reason why these grape varieties wouldn't be, equally suitable to making both sparkling and still wines. So
now we've ignored a little bit kind of the big grape for this region, Macabeo, which is the one I think that if most people who are like even a little bit into wine, you said, well, what's a major Cava grape? And they actually knew one of the three, they'd probably know Macabeo or Viura, same grape, different names. What's your thoughts on Macabeo versus Parellada or Xarel·lo?
I think that it's maybe less suited to making the styles of sparkling wine that I like. It tends to make these, I could see why it's popular, because it is sort of this in between where it's like a little bit fruitier. It can tend to lend this sort of like gasoline-y quality to the wines, which is, again, something that you always pick up in a blind tasting is if you get Cava, it can often have that like white pepper kind of smoky mineral quality to it. In the best case scenarios, in other cases, it's maybe a little bit more offensive. But it also tends to be, I believe, a little bit lower in acidity. It can push the alcohol levels a little bit more, so you have to harvest it a little more underripe. So for me, it's actually maybe the least exciting of the Cava grape varieties, despite its prevalence.
Because I'll say it's the one I'm most familiar with. I think it's the one that I've seen the most examples of. I'd even say I've seen more varietal Xarellos out there. This is probably the second varietal Parellada I've ever had, and I've got to say, like, the little bit of skin contact, it's not really an orange wine, even if some orange influences. I really like how aromatic and bright this is. And when I think about Spain, and especially as we dig into like La Mancha, where it's just like, I think La Mancha literally just means like grilled soil or something. It doesn't have these light, fresh, aromatic, high acid wines. You don't think of that with Spain. I love that this is a style that's starting to emerge, at least in the North American consciousness, however long it's actually been made, as like a style of table wines. Is something you're seeing more and more and more on your end?
Yeah, definitely. It's really funny because even though we've been importing wines for 5 years now, this is our very first Spanish producer. That's not to say that we haven't wanted to work with other Spanish producers before. We've reached out to a handful, and they often just don't have wine for us because their production is so small. But this is the first time that we've actually had a producer from Spain, and this was the first time that we felt like somebody really nailed the price to quality to intrigue ratio. And packaging and everything, like, really hit all the marks for us. There are people that we got along with immediately. And so for us, I think Spain is super exciting. We're seeing lower alcohol levels. We're seeing less heavy-handed oak influence. We're seeing the resurgence of indigenous grape varieties as opposed to an emphasis on international grape varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon or Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. We're seeing more, again, things like Mencia pop up, things like Parellada, things like Xarello, things like
Chapacudo.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really exciting that we're starting to see that. So for me, we've definitely been looking to Spain. It's just been hard to find the perfect producer for us. And these guys, they definitely represent that sort of Goldilocks zone of like intriguing but approachable, fit all of our requirements as far as, they farm organically. They're not using any additives throughout the entire winemaking process. And in 2019, they actually didn't even add sulfur, which is crazy. This is like the cleanest unsulfured wine I maybe have ever tasted. They're super young and small production. And so, yeah, they definitely fit all the marks from us, but that doesn't mean that we're not super excited about Spain as a general statement right now.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, so Aaron's got the map queued up here. No, I'm completely skewing you. Aaron just got up to get a glass of wine. We are going to hit maps in a second here. But I was actually hoping you'd finish talking when Aaron was actually on the other side of the room getting a glass. But no, we will get to maps because I do want to talk about this region a little bit, just because Spain's such a big and varied country, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to see the map as well, so you can kind of follow along with what I'm talking about. I don't know if that'll be possible. Maybe it will be. But Aaron, we're just going to flip over to maps here if you can.
Just give me a sec.
There we go. And I'm not going to zoom in just yet. You let me know when I can click in. Go ahead and click in. There we go. So I don't know if you can see it, Eric, but I can see it, and so can the folks at home. This is a map of Spain. Oh, beautiful. So I'm sure you know exactly who I stole this map from off Google. But I mean, you've got your major regions that most people are going to be familiar with here, with La Rioja and Navarra. We've got Galicia up here, which makes such absolutely beautiful white wines. As we move south, we get Ribera del Duero and Aragon. But where we're talking about here in particular is Catalonia. Can you let me zoom in here, Aaron?
Yep, just scroll.
Thank you. So this whole region through here is Catalonia. This is the city of Tarragona, which is very close to Barcelona here. And then just to the north of Tarragona region, here is Concha De Barbera. And this is the actual region we're talking about here. So like Eric was saying, here's the ocean. And by this point, just inland, we're already at 400 to 750 meters above sea level. So it gets steep in a bloody hurry. Just so we don't have to go back to the maps right away, away when we get to the last wine. Our first three wines are all going to come from here. When we get to our fourth wine, we're going to be talking about down here, La Mancha, kind of this central plateau, where it is very hot, very dry, absolutely freezing in winter, and we're closer to Madrid than we are really anywhere else. It's also actually the largest continuous wine region within Western Europe. And it has not historically been thought of as being one of the more premium wine regions out there. It tended to be a region much more heavily into co-ops than individual producers. And indeed, our fourth wine is actually a co-op wine. And I think we're done with maps for the second, Aaron. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Anything you want to jump in on there, Eric?
Yeah, I'd say that one of the other things that makes this, from like the map perspective, that makes it really interesting is it's adjacent to two of the most famous regions in all of Spain as far as modern regions go, which is Priorat and Montsant, which are like, again, 20-minute drive away or something like that, like literally adjacent to one another. And then the other thing is the fact that this is high elevation limestone predominantly. So it's basically a big like limestone mountain range outcropping. So here you see a combination of limestone and clay, which is the same combination that you see in a lot of the most famous regions in the world, whether that be in places like Champagne has that combination of soil types depending on where you're looking, places like Burgundy. So whenever you see this combination of limestone, altitude, you end up getting, potentially really spectacular wines, and this is no exception.
Beautiful. Well, let's go with one of the less appreciated cava grapes, and the grape that's going to be in common for both the rosé and the red, Trepat. Not a grape variety that I had read about, and I'd probably had before on a number of occasions when I had rosé cava, but I'd never really thought of as a single varietal before. I know it's kind of thin skin. I know it's very pale skinned, kind of like Pulsard or like Goriot. Talk to us about Trepat.
Totally. Trepat's an interesting one. There's actually sort of maybe a misconception that it has thin skins, but it actually has fairly thick skins. They're just very lightly colored. So you end up with this weird combination of thicker skins that can provide you with things like tannin, structural elements, but the color tends to be quite pale. And this is basically why this grape wasn't very popular. On the export market, in the late 90s and 2000s in particular, dark was all the rage. Everybody wanted dark wines, big wines, bold wines. So a grape variety that tends to produce these more sort of like elegant styles, maybe not light in body necessarily, definitely still full in body, but maybe more delicate stylistically, it basically just fell out of favor and most people ripped it out. So there's less than 1,000 hectares of this planted in the world anymore, as far as I know at least. Trepat is sort of the opposite of what we just talked about with Parellada from like a ripening perspective. It tends to do better at sort of modest altitudes. It basically buds really early, meaning it's quite susceptible to spring frost. Again, another reason why a lot of people ripped it up for a period of time and planted, maybe more cold hardy grape varieties that could withstand those spring frosts. But for these guys, they're like, no, we 100% believe in this indigenous grape variety. It's thought to have actually come from essentially the commune that they're in. So for them, like that's a really cool opportunity to show off something that is truly uniquely, not only Spanish, but uniquely from their particular pocket of the Catalan region. Again, like you were saying, often used to make rosé cava. You'll sometimes see Monastrell in there as well, Pinot Noir in there to add color. But Trepat is maybe the most finessed and truly Spanish of those grape varieties. So it's cool to see them doing a different interpretation of it. This wine is just like, it's honestly, this was the wine that made me know that I wanted to import them. I picked up a bottle in New York once, drank it, loved it, super cool. And then I had some friends in Lethbridge who just happened to move there. And they were like, oh, we drank this wine in New York. Like, is there any chance you can get it? And we're like, oh my goodness, we're actually going to be importing that wine. And so I was like, okay, cool, double down. And just, we knew that we needed it. It's just so fun and so juicy. They take the grapes and they directly press them They're not allowing any maceration or anything like that. So this color is quite delicate. It's not like super dark rosé. It's not super light rosé from a color perspective, but they're treating it really gently. So it ends up being quite gentle on the palate, which is something that I really like. So
I actually went on a bit of a journey with this wine of being really excited for it and then not getting it and then absolutely loving it. Because when I first saw it, I was like, oh, it's got popsicles and sandals and watermelons and starfish. This is just going to be silly and fresh and bright, and it's going to be just a no-brainer. It's going to be so fun. And then I got it, I was like, wow, this is actually way more serious than I thought. And it initially threw me this like earthy, like lightly cheesy richness right through the mid-mouth really threw me. I was like, ooh, I don't know. Like that's not what I expected at all. The wine's fine, but that's not what I thought I was getting. And then I slowly came around to it over about a day and a half. I was like, actually, that's a good thing. I like that it can drink like no-brainer summer rosé on the back deck, just at a barbecue, but it's actually a really interesting wine if you want to dig into it. I really like that it has that second gear. It's not just a one-trick pony of, hey, it's got a popsicle on the label. Totally. I love that it's actually got that second level.
Yeah, definitely. And this is, again, partially influenced by the fact that they're using very old vines. These are 40-plus-year-old vines in this case. So you're getting a lot more complexity out of it, a lot more depth. Normally, people are making rosé with their cheapest grapes.
Sorry, Aaron.
Often grapes that, basically can't make anything else.
Sorry, I've got a question that requires me to retaste the white, so I'm trying to get Aaron to get my spill bucket because I don't want to just down this rosé and then just to answer a question on the white and go back to the rosé. Oh, Donnie, the spill bucket's right on top. Right on top, just to your left hand. He's got it. He's got it. He's got it. Oh, it's full of stuff. That's why. Never mind.
Oh, it's full of spit.
It's not full of spit, you weirdo. Thank you, Donnie. No thanks whatsoever to Aaron, as usual. Bloody useless, I swear. Sorry, someone asked, and I do hate to kind of cut in like that. These are very professional streams that are filled with professionalism. Tasting note on the Parellada. I know you're having a beer, it appears. But I don't know. Like you said, like it's an aromatic grape. Like I get lots of fresh apple. I get citrus, like specifically lemon. I do get that really nice skin contact kind of richness that's almost like dried apricot. I get grass. I get a little bit of that almost Chenin Blanc-y wet wool, wet stone sort of thing that I really like in this. And the nose smells like this is going to be so relaxed and so calm and so laid back. And then you get it in the mouth and it just blows up for me, which I really like. It's not... It smells like it's going to be more laid back, more like a Mosel Riesling. And then it kind of does that same trick that Mosel Riesling does. It smells very laid back in the nose, not like Rheingau. And then it goes off in the mouth, which I really like about this. That skin contact from the grape skins really just shows up. It's textural, it's bright, it's got tons of fruit. What am I missing here, Eric? What do you really love about this wine? If you were, I know you don't have it in front of you, but if you were to just, gun to your head tasting note, what do you love about this wine? What does it make you think of immediately?
Yeah, I really like that there's like a saline quality to it. Again, like almost that like saltiness that I think really makes certain white wines very refreshing, whether that be like Muscadet, for instance. I feel like it has a lot of sort of those characteristics to it, which I really appreciate. A little hint of something umami. I think you nailed it with the wool characteristic that you'd expect off of Chenin. I like to think like kind of warm hay, something kind of along those lines. But yeah, I think you nailed it with that tasting note.
Michelle, you do not have to apologize for asking the tasting note. It was a good question. Aaron owes me an apology, but no.
I mean.
A little.
Also.
I mean, you'll say yes on camera, but also deeply no. Yeah, that's fair. So let's do the same thing for the rosé, just so we can talk about the tasting note on that as well. Oddly enough, I get watermelon out of a lot of rosés. For a rosé that has a giant watermelon on the label, it's one of the very few like classic rosé things I don't get on this at all. I don't get melon on this.
I think it could be because it just landed too. We've only had these wines in the province for 2 weeks now. And they took a very long time to get here because of COVID. Basically, they were stuck on a boat off the coast of Canada for about a month, and then finally made their way across. Fortunately, they were in reefer, so they were in a refrigerated container during their entire journey. But basically, wines get a little bit rattled after they've been on, such an epic adventure. Some of them show up, ready to party, and then some of them, like me, tend to get a little bit of jet lag and require a couple of days to acclimatize. And so they might be kind of getting used to it. So on the previous vintage that we had of this, that I tasted, the sample bottle from, it definitely did have like a pronounced watermelon characteristic to it. So I feel like that'll maybe come out in the next week or so once this wine, gets a chance to settle a little bit. But for me, the tasting notes, interestingly, like lots of almost like Rainier cherry, like that kind of like yellow cherry characteristic, which I really appreciate in a rosé. Again, definitely that savory element that you were talking about, almost a little bit of like a creaminess, like a strawberry shortcake kind of vibe, which again is something that I really like. Like I think that yellow popsicle is telling a little bit with that red or the yellow cherry kind of characteristic a little bit. So a little bit of spice, almost like pink peppercorns, something in that sort of neighborhood. A little bit floral, a little bit kind of rosy, dried, sort of dusky rose. But I really like the style of this wine. It's that perfect middle point between being those really sort of like flamboyant, dark, 14% alcohol rosé that you expect out of Spain, and then the light, 12% alcohol, quaffable, almost white rosés that you'd expect out of, Provence in certain cases. So this is kind of like a happy medium.
I completely agree. And I mean, let's be fair, a very low sulfur, 12% alcohol, very young rosé is kind of like the test case for bottle shock. They do tend to get, if this was a 14.5, 15.5 Australian Shiraz, bottle shock wouldn't even be a question. That one is basically port. It's fine. This is definitely going to be a little more fragile.
Yeah.
And that is something that, these days, as I place $36,000 weekly liquor orders and get 13,000 of it. Those are the sorts of situations where I'm buying stuff just to have something on the shelves the second it shows up. And, maybe 2 years ago, I'd have had the luxury where if I brought this in, it maybe wasn't drinking like we wanted, we'd sit on it for a couple of weeks. Right now, we don't have the luxury. There's nothing else landing right now. Like, this is cool right now. This might be the only cool thing that shows up for like May and early June period. Like, we might get anything else. Shipping has really kind of forced our hands where, I hope it's good right away, because if it's great in a month, it'll probably be already sold out in a month.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're experiencing that as well, where we had wine that was supposed to show up 6 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, this week, and 2 weeks from now, all show up in the same week. And we're like, I don't understand how shipping works.
Well, the short answer is it doesn't.
Part of my job. Yeah, exactly. I just place a PO. They tell me that it's on a boat somewhere. And then, magically, in literally X amount of time, in a completely undefined variable amount of time, it shows up here for X amount of dollars, because they seem to be charging us a completely arbitrary amount per case these days, based on, I don't know. I don't even know. This is the most infuriating part, is you get these newsletters from the shipping company all the time being like, this is now delayed. Also, we're charging you this much money for this thing now. And we're like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah, it's awful.
The frustration we're dealing with. But the cool thing about this too is that basically we realized that this wine was an absurd price to quality ratio. It was a style of wine that would be quite universally appealing. The packaging was great. And so we kind of just reached out to, our three best customers across, or three of our best customers across the province, Highlands up in Edmonton, Bricks Wine Shop in Calgary, and then you guys down in Lethbridge, and said, hey, would you want to work with this as an exclusive? And then nobody else in Lethbridge, nobody else in Calgary, nobody else in Edmonton, or in the rest of the province for that matter, would get to sell it. So this is a really cool opportunity where you're one of three stores in all of Alberta that actually gets your hand on these wines. So that's I don't know. I think that's cool as well.
And despite all the shipping woes, literally the exact perfect time. Like, this is exactly when I want to be drinking this. This, like, early spring, start of summer. Yeah, this is when I want to be drinking this.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I did want to talk about how bottle shock's a thing. It's something that we don't talk about all that often. And you and I, like, we know immediately what it is, but it's one of those things that I heard about the industry, but I was never really, like, ever formally educated on. I don't know if you ever covered it, like, when you were doing diploma, but, like, it's a thing everybody accepts, but I don't know if I've ever gotten any formal classes on what bottle shock is, why it happens, how to deal with it, how to talk about it. It seems to be just one of those very accepted things that nobody's really prepared for. Nobody really takes the time to teach you about it, seems like. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah,
or?
and it's like, yeah, it's a little bit misunderstood because there's sort of two different things at play. One is the actual bottling of the wine. So basically, whenever a wine goes from like one place, one sort of situation into another situation, you can end up with a shocked wine, whether that be from going from a tank into a bottle. That's a very stressful situation for the wine. It gets rattled, it gets exposed to oxygen, it gets taken out of a vessel that it's sort of grown comfortable with. And again, this is anthropomorphizing the wine.
It's wildly anthropomorphizing the wine, but that's okay. It's what we do.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, like basically when the wine gets bottled, it gets rattled. And so you end up seeing different flavor characteristics. And this is a huge thing for winemakers that they stress out about real hard, is that when you bottle the wine, it could taste perfect right before you bottle it when you taste it from tank. You put it to bottle and you wait a couple hours and the wine tastes awful. So you often have to wait a certain amount of time. It depends on the wine. It could be a couple weeks. It could be a couple months until the time that it turns back around. Then you have travel shock, which is basically the same sort of situation. It's going from, in theory, the grapes were harvested, fermented, bottled, all in the same place, at the same altitude, with the same pressures, with the same sort of relative climate, versus when the wine ends up in its new home, it's really acclimatized to that. And again, there's a lot of reasons why they think that this might happen, whether it be atmospheric pressure, whether it be things like, humidity and how that affects how the wine tastes. But essentially, when a wine has traveled a long distance, it usually needs a couple weeks to settle. Again, I wish there was more research done on why this is, but that's sort of the general concept. For us, we have the luxury of knowing when a wine has landed, so we can understand that, like, oh, this is a high quality wine that's, showing characteristics that are uncharacteristic of itself. But yeah, it's the nature of the beast. There's a lot of wines that we bring in that sell before their optimal time. People aren't necessarily going to either hang on to them for a couple months for them to like completely settle into their environment, or in some cases, wines are released earlier than their like optimal drinking window. Bordeaux, a great example of that. It's going to taste best 10 to 15 years after the time that it's released. And, we drink them young and they're fun young, but maybe there's more potential for them. So I guess there's all these different versions of when is the optimal time to drink something. And for this rosé, I'm going to say a week to 2 weeks from now is going to be the optimal time, both from a temperature outdoor perspective and from the wine sort of settling into itself.
One thing I've always been curious about is how the method of shipping matters. Like, it's going to be on the back of a truck from the winery to the port, and it's going to be on a boat, or in the case of Beaujolais Nouveau, it's going to be flown over in a plane, or it's going to be on a railroad. I really wonder how much it matters. Like, just taking Beaujolais Nouveau up to, however high planes fly, I don't actually know. Does that matter? I mean, it's not like I really love Beaujolais Nouveau anyway, but is it actively worse because of the fact that it got brought up to 10, 20,000, 30,000 feet and then brought back down? I mean, does that matter? I'd be fascinated to know.
Yeah, I've no idea. There's a lot of really cool studies about aging wine underwater, which is sort of the opposite. And it seems to be a really great environment to age wine because it's dark, there's high pressures, there's no oxygen. Apparently something about the gentle swaying of the waves, make sure that the wine is constantly in motion, but not being like shaken up all the time. So, and it's a consistent temperature, which is one of the major problems with shipping wine, is that there are going to be, even when you're in a refrigerated container, there's still going to be temperature fluctuations, which can really heavily impact the way that a wine tastes. So yeah, I don't know, maybe it's like the exact opposite, and it's actually the worst thing you can ever possibly do to a wine is ship Beaujolais Nouveau in an airplane.
On a jumbo jet, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at least we're not ruining anything good.
Yeah.
On that very controversial note, let's move on to the red. I do owe everyone an apology. I find this actually drinks better after it's been open for a little bit. I was actually going to, at the start, tell everyone to open this immediately so it had some time to get a little bit of air to it. Mine has been open for about an hour and a bit, so apologies, that was my mistake. Let's dig into the red here. Still Trepat.
Totally. Still Trepat. Yeah, this is their red, or their entry-level red, I guess. They do a couple different reds, most of which are made from Trepat. They have one that is made from Trepat that was planted in 1900, so 120-year-old vines. This is their quote-unquote young vines, so again, about 40 years old. This is named after the fireflies that they saw in the vineyard. Succés basically means, in the Catalan language, like an important moment or like a celebration. So they name each of the wines after like an important experience that they've had together. And one of them was seeing fireflies in this particular vineyard. And so they decided to name this wine after that. They do long maceration times, meaning that once they harvest and crush the grapes, they allow the grape skins to sit with the grape juice for extended periods of time, up to a month, which is, again, in our portfolio, that's fairly uncommon. Most of our producers usually only let their wine sit on the skins for 1 to 2 weeks. So they're extracting a lot more flavor, a lot more intensity, but they really like that style. It's sort of this halfway between points of, old school Spanish wine and the new school Spanish wine. So it's bright, it's fresh, but still has tons of intensity. It's not shy in alcohol either. I can't remember exactly what this is, 13%, something like that, 13.5, somewhere in that neighborhood. So definitely got, ample richness to it. Mostly aged in stainless steel, but a little bit of it aged in barrel as well, just to add that extra texture for sure. Yeah.
We had a question on how to pronounce the rosé. I'm not even going to try a stab at that.
Yeah, it's Pataxanga.
Pataxanga?
Yeah. It's basically there's like two things that it could mean. One, in like the Catalan dialogue, apparently one of them is it's like kind of their version of like street soccer. So like if you're just like playing soccer on the street, it's like that's what they call the game. I think there's maybe more diverse rules to it or something like that. But either way, it's like a casual game of soccer. And then the other thing is this like little get together that you do in somebody's like kitchen or backyard where there's musicians that play, like local musicians. They come play, you drink a lot of wine. And so they're like, yeah, that's where you would be wanting to drink this. But yeah, I believe it's Pataxanga. Yeah, cool. I could be wrong about that, but my Catalan is not particularly good. But
well, it's not exactly the world's most easy to understand language. It's
for sure.
It's difficult at best.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not as bad as Basque, but it's still not great.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe you want to offer your tasting note on this.
On this?
So,
ooh.
Yeah.
I do find that this
grandmaster.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Eric. You guys are dicks. Fine. I find this wine has a little bit of reductive quality when it's very first open. That's why I said it should probably be open for a little bit. It's got this wonderful smoky mineral character to it right from the very top. That reminds me in the oddest way of like Nerello Mascalese is probably the closest grape variety that I can really compare in terms of like what this reminds me of. If I had tasted this without ever having it, because I don't think I've ever had a Trepat red. If I had, I wasn't aware. You would ask me, what is this? I'd probably have gone Nerello on this. It doesn't have the cherry that Nerello has, but it's got more of a... Currants is the wrong word. Maybe... No, I think I'm actually happy with currants into raspberries here. And I love how lifted everything is. Like it has such a, it's a relatively simple nose up to a point, but it's very fulfilling. Like I keep coming back to it and I keep enjoying something different about it. It's not something where, you know, so that it's not an 82 Mouton Rothschild or something. I'm not finding 10,000 things. It's a reasonably simple nose, but I do keep finding different aspects of it that I enjoy as it opens up in the mouth. I would not pick this at 13% alcohol. It tastes lighter. Now, Devin will tell you I'm notoriously famous at picking alcohol for anything because I came from the Scotch side and my tongue's shot. I can drink 68.5, like cast strength single malt. It's like, oh, this is fine, doesn't need water. I'm bad at telling you what alcohol is. But yeah, whoever picked up, Devin picked out pepper, and pepper is absolutely beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sort of the famous tasting notes for Trepat in a red style is often raspberry, cinnamon, which I think is a really cool tasting note. Again, kind of feeds into that peppery quality, a little bit of that spice note that you're getting. I find that sometimes that reductive quality can lead into things like cinnamon, clove, nutmeg. They can kind of like have this sort of synergy, that kind of gunpowdery quality a little bit.
Gunpowder is interesting. You know, I'm struggling with the cinnamon, and that just might be the shape of the glass, or it just might be me. But gunpowder, I'll be right there with you. Gunpowder is actually a fantastic note for this.
Nice. Yeah, I'm excited. We just picked up a bottle of each of these. I tried to get to the office before I started this tasting, so I could pick up my bottles that I purchased personally for taking photos of for our website that I then plan on drinking. Not really samples necessarily. Anyways, I got them, but I left them at the office. So now I feel like I'm missing out on the actually experiencing the tasting.
So what are you drinking, Eric? You've been sipping on this all night.
Yeah, brought in like a sneaky little.
The burdock, yeah.
Yeah, so this is the Dort Dock. We basically brought this in because I have a friend named Joe Dort, and he's like sort of a famous Calgary restaurant personality. And the second that I saw that there was a beer with his name on it, we reached out to Burdock and we're like, hey, I know that you said that we couldn't have any of this, but can we have some? And they were kind enough to send us 5 flats, of which Joe purchased most of them, but I was able to get a couple cans for personal consumption. So yeah, it's a Dortmunder style lager. So a little German influence there, a little bit richer style lager, which is awesome.
Cool. I'm just going to step away for a second here, Eric, to cover our upcoming events, including next Wednesday's beer tasting and 1 week from tonight, the only 6 months overdue, long after we promised. Most people assumed we forgot. Return of Cantankerous Cocktails. Yay, Cantankerous Cocktails, that thing we thought we were going to do and then lied. So our topic for the beer tasting on Wednesday night is kind of the forgotten beers from really successful breweries. I mean, we sell tons of Annex and Blyman and Cabin and 88. These are, along with Establishment, probably 4 of our 5 most successful breweries that we sell. But they all have the beer that maybe isn't leading the way for us. Annex, the impetus for this was actually talking to Rupert Mangwell from Annex a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that Meets and Bounds, like it was one of their 2 launch beers, and it has stayed all these 4 years since they opened in the core lineup, but it's the slowest seller of their cores, which is interesting. I think it could do better. I want to talk about it. I want to taste it on its own. Blind Men Long Shadows. they straight out told me they were aiming for like Blind Pig, Pliny the Young, or Pliny the Elder from Russian River Brewing Company. They were aiming for this absolutely classic pie in the sky, what a lot of people think is like the best West Coast IPA ever made. They were going to keep rebrewing this recipe and developing and developing and developing until they were satisfied it was like really as close as they could get to that perfect style they had in their mind. And yet when Blind New England Pale Ale came out, it just kind of stopped selling. It wasn't like the new sexiness. It wasn't the beer that took over the market 3 years ago. So I want to bring it back and say, okay, well, this is still an awesome IPA. Our best-selling beer in the entire shop is Cabin Super Saturation New England Pale Ale. Cabin has another bloody IPA in their core range. It's called Sunshine Rain. It rules. You should be drinking it. So we are going to talk about that too. And then finally from 88, I actually wanted the hologram wheat here, but instead we're going to do the Tiffany Rosé Saison. I kind of get why this one doesn't sell as well as, say, Ring Pop or Wave Pool or Night Gallery or Monster Truck Light. I do. But I still think it rules, and we should sell more of it than we do. So we're gonna talk about that as well. So that is our project for Wednesday night. Tasting tickets are $20 as always. Coming up 1 week from tonight. Oh, this one's going to take a second. Thank you for bearing with me, Eric. We are going to do Cantankerous Cocktails. We are going to do 4 cocktails based around 4 ingredients. And by 4, I mean 5. We are going to be doing cocktails kind of based around vermouth and Campari because it is summer and Campari is wonderful. So we are going to be doing some cocktails using bourbon and gin, of course, Campari and red vermouth. And have you had this Taos Estate like Riesling-based vermouth, Eric?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because it rules. I love this. I mean, I love Riesling anything, but I particularly love this. But this is going to be our first live and second ever Cantankerous Cocktails episode. And we're going to be doing 4 cocktails. So using the bourbon, we're going to be making a Manhattan. Actually, Mike is going to be walking us through a perfect Manhattan, as well as a Boulevardier, which is kind of like a bourbon Negroni, but I think it's actually more interesting than that. We are going to be doing a classic Negroni, of course, and we are going to be doing an Americano Cocktail, which is probably the most obscure thing that we're going to be doing, and it's why we are including a little tiny can of soda water, because it really is just Campari and red vermouth and soda, but if you get the proportions exactly right, it's my favorite summer cocktail of all. It just encapsulates everything I love about cocktail culture. So tickets for those are $35. Now, I realize that's about what we charge for a Scotch tasting, but the Scotch tasting, you get like 1 ounce of everything. With this, you're going to get like 3 ounces of bourbon and 4 ounces of red vermouth and 4 ounces of Campari and, you know, 1 ounce each of the gin and the vermouth plus the can of soda. You get a lot for your tasting kit. We spent, well, we're not even done yet. I think we've already got 6 hours into building these kits and we're not even close to done. So you probably got about 12 hours of our blood, sweat, and tears, not literally in the kits themselves. So yeah, it's been a lot. And I really haven't been all that involved. Mike did most of the work today. Any further questions about the Vinicola Succés before we move on and quickly talk about the Cabernet from La Mancha here? I don't know why I asked because I know I'm on a 20-second delay here. So let's just jump into the La Mancha Cab. This is La Villarreal. Not to be confused with Villarreal, the estate by Cune. Not sure how that works, but all right, you go, Spain. Now this comes from La Mancha, which is from the Central Plateau in Spain. Very, very hot in summer, absolutely frigid winters. This is one of the regions in Spain where they actually have to plant the vines further apart. In a lot of regions in the world, they plant the vines very close together, just so that Aaron just broke everything. So the vines actually compete with each other for water. In this case, they plant the vines further apart so that the vines actually don't die of thirst. This is done as the Reserva. It's not done as a traditional Reserva. It is 18 months in French and American barrels. It's done as a 2015. And this is the interesting part about this one. Why is this on the table? This sounds like a wine that Devin and I would hate. This doesn't sound like something we would bring in. And you're absolutely right. This does sound like something Devin and I would hate. We tasted this and we were both kind of like giving each other the side eye around the tasting counter. Eric does that look. It's the, oh, we don't like this. But we were kind of having this look about this, and then they poured it in our glass. So we're like, okay, is it just me, or like does this kind of rule? This is actually really, really good. This is very much what Devin and I would call a Calgary steakhouse wine. It's got a lot of oak. It's got a fair bit of alcohol at 14. It's very generous. It's big and fruity. But all of that being said, it has really nice structure. It has really nice depth. The Cabernet Sauvignon quality actually shines through. Despite being a wine I really ought to dislike, I actually can't dislike this. I think this is really well done for the style. And I wouldn't have expected this from bloody La Mancha. If someone had told me I was going to like a cab like this, I'd have said, oh, it'd be from like Navarra, because I famously like Navarra. But no, it's kind of from this oddball low-end region made by a cooperative in the middle of Spain. And no, this kind of rules. Now, one big difference here is, I mean, this is made by a co-op. This is made by an independent winemaker. Do you want to talk a little bit about the slow decline of cooperatives in Spain and just how big they used to be? Because even some of like the big like brand name wineries we see all the time in Alberta are co-ops. Like, these are not small wineries.
Definitely. The co-op method works really well, especially in somewhere like Spain, which has, they're consistently the top 3 biggest producers in the world by volume. Yet they have a lot of small landowners. And not only that, but the ratio of land to production is way lower than those other top producers. And the reason for that is exactly what you just said. You have to plant the vines super far apart because there's no water. The soils are essentially barren in a lot of the different regions in Spain. And so the way that a lot of these producers could actually survive is by selling their grapes to a cooperative. And, this is sort of like the same, winemaking / farming ideology of like communism, where it's like everybody grows grapes. They just bring it to a central processing facility, and then that's like distributed out from there. And that's essentially what they're doing. It's sharecropping as a way of helping these farmers. So winery equipment is extremely expensive. Making wine is an entirely separate skill from growing grapes. And so, a lot of these farmers who are growing grapes, that's not their only source of income. They don't have time to also be a winemaker, also market their wines, come up with label designs, understand the international market and what's popular and all these sort of things. And so by farming really good grapes, selling those to a cooperative, the cooperative making wine from this guy's Cabernet Sauvignon and this guy's Chardonnay and this guy's Garnacha and this guy's, and they just put it all together and they make whatever they think they can sell. They're pooling their resources essentially. Ultimately, what this means is that you get less uniqueness, though. You get less sign of place. For us, we get really excited about single vineyards. Somebody who's watching who's both growing the grapes and making the wine, so they can control every step of the process to get something that's really unique, really interesting, really delicious, and sort of their vision of their particular plot of land. Co-ops are really successful at making wine that's relatively inexpensive, wine that's very consistent and very delicious, but you're not getting that translation of that extra piece of the puzzle that I think Kyle and I are most excited about, which is, again, that uniqueness, that sense of place, that somewhereness, the terroir, the authenticity. Those are some of the things that we get most excited about. And you lack that a little bit with co-ops. But again, if for bang for buck, and not only that, but supporting really small farmers, it's great. You're seeing less of it now because it's become more and more expensive to farm, that much land, make a small amount of grapes, sell it, because the international market is so much more competitive. You're competing with places like Chile and Argentina that are not functioning in the euro and therefore are able to, pay workers a little bit less.
Or a lot less.
Trying to be.
Let's just say the big frozen logs of juice. That's what you're competing against, is big frozen logs of juice out of South America, which is what everybody's competing against to a point. Exactly. And that's the problem with co-ops right now.
Yeah, and so versus in Spain, you're still functioning on the euro, you have to fit within EU standards, all these sort of things. It basically means that they can't be quite as competitive from a price perspective, which is what Spain was historically known for. And so now they're like, where else do we need to be? Where else can we be competitive? And it's quality. So I think that the best wines coming from Spain right now are no longer competing in like the $15 to $20 mark, but more in the $25 to $35 mark. If you're willing to spend $25 to $35 on a bottle of wine from Spain, you're getting like incredible value. Like nobody's making wines that are $25 to $35 that are that good elsewhere in the world, versus I think in that like $15 to $20 category, now you can find, if like that's what you're looking for is value wines, you can find those from South Africa, from Chile, from Argentina, from et cetera, from these places where it's less expensive to function as a company.
So I did want to kind of preface why I did this is two reasons. One, even in that model of, oh, well, the cooperatives are doing things, you know, very cheaply. This is a wine that spent 18 months in French and American oak barrels. It's made from Cabernet Sauvignon. If this was from, you know, California, it'd be $45. I think on our shelves, we're charging the princely something like $26.95. Compared to any of those Californian wines, I think this is something I would rather drink 100 times than 100. But the other reason I wanted to do this is, say 10 years ago, hell, even like 8 years ago, you went to my Spanish section, and apart from a couple of whites, everything was like this. Every Spanish wine on the entire shelf, without exception, was in some way either this style or very closely related to this style with the Joven, Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva scale. I wanted to show this because this is very good, and it's a couple bucks more than the Succés wines, but it's very much in the same idea, except this is what they did for so long. This is what it is now. I'd actually ask everybody at home to kind of go back and say, well, let's try the La Vie Royale against the white, against the rosé, against the red, and just taste like this is everything that, like, in the 21 years I've been doing this, this is what we have sold from Spain for 18 of those 21 years. This is kind of the new Spain, and I do consider this exceptionally good and exceptionally good value. And if this was 10, 12 years ago, even 8 years ago, we might have had a case stack of this up at the till saying, this is our summer barbecue one. You need to drink this. I can't believe how good this cab is. But now this is going to be our case stack up at the till. And it's just how much the industry has changed. It actually isn't. I still have just a little tiny bit of got grapes left. But yeah. It's an interesting test case. It is. And it's something that you and I immediately know fundamentally about Spain. It's like, this is what Spain used to be. This is what Spain is. But if you don't work in it every day, seeing that shift is shocking. When I was setting this up, I tasted this against this, and I actually think this was in a worse place when it first showed up, speaking of bottle shock. And just the difference and how much more I enjoyed this right away, even though it was less money, I was just shocked. I still like this, and I'll say this, if I was going over to have dinner with my dad, who still loves, well, bad example, he can't drink Spanish wine because he's allergic to it. And I'm actually also mildly allergic to this, so I'm actually going to set that to one side. But if I was going over to have dinner with my dad and he wasn't allergic to Spanish wine, this is something I'd bring for him. But I think for our store where we're going, this is much more what we're going to sell. We're still going to have stuff like this on the shelf, because to just throw away all of Spain's 300-400 years of like making this style and cultivating this style is a mistake, but not embracing this is equally as big a mistake.
I think it's really interesting too, looking at what each of these companies have decided to invest their money into. Where Succés, they've invested the money that goes into their wines into farming practices, being organic, working with small producers, old vines. And with the cab, the investment here was in oak, extended aging, holding those wines back, because it costs money to have 5 vintages in your cellar, as opposed to Succés. They overwinter their wine, so they'll have at most 2 vintages in their cellar at any given time, versus, or maybe 3 vintages. They still have some 2017 of their higher end wines, but again, they're releasing 2019's, 2020s now even, actually. And so it's interesting to see, again, where each producer chooses what's valuable to them, whether it be organic farming, and that's the thing that they find really valuable, or whether that be in oak and the flavors and that provides, and what long aging adds to the wine. So it's it's different decisions being made by different people for different palates, and that's the fun of wine, is that there isn't one right answer. If there was one right answer, there'd be a lot fewer wine jobs.
And all our names would be Robert Parker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, pass. I like that it's I like it's a little more interesting these days. And I do still really like this style of wine. I do think there's a home for it. Like, I really do enjoy high-end older Riojas. I absolutely adore them. Maybe not for like a warm summer afternoon though. I think that's better suited for this.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. This was a delight.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I always appreciate you folks reaching out and letting me come and rant for, an evening.
Yeah, well, I did a little ranting too, so it was a good match. Thank you very much, Eric. Have a wonderful night.
Yeah, yourself as well.
Take care. And for all of you at home, I've been Kyle with Andrew Hilton Wine and Spirits. We'll see you Wednesday night for beer tasting, or Friday night for the glorious, if very procrastinated, return of Cantankerous Cocktails. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your Friday night and the rest of your weekend. Good night.